Imagine you are standing ankle-deep in dust so thick it coats your tongue. The sun is hammering down like a weapon. Your shield is slick with sweat, your arm numb from holding it too long. In front of you, the ground doesn't end. It just keeps going. And going. And going. Rows of enemy soldiers stretch to the horizon. Steel flashing. Banners snapping. A living wall of men so vast your brain refuses to count them. You're one of 47,000. They are 250,000. And someone, somewhere, has decided this will all be settled. Today. In one day. Here's the impossible question. How does a man with a force outnumbered 5-1 erase an empire? Before the sun goes down? Stay with me. Because what happens next is not strategy as you know it. It is fear weaponized. Pain turned into momentum. And a single decision that condemned tens of thousands of men. Before the first spear ever hit flesh. You think ancient warfare is slow? Wait. Before this day is over, the field will run black with blood. Men will drown standing upright. Horses will scream like people. And an empire that ruled the world for 2 centuries will break in less time than it takes to tell the story. And here's the part history textbooks don't tell you. This battle wasn't won by numbers. It wasn't even won by genius. It was won by something far darker. Let me show you. But first, you need to understand how insane this situation really is. Because in a few moments, you're going to see a king charge straight into hell. On purpose. And it only gets worse from there. Stay with me. Because in this story, there are 5 moments so brutal, so unbelievable, that even hardened soldiers would later refuse to speak about them. You'll witness a formation so deadly it crushed men alive without killing them. You'll see a Persian noble ride into battle dressed like a god, and die screaming in the dirt. You'll hear how one terrified Macedonian teenager survived by pretending to be dead beneath a pile of corpses. You'll watch an entire wing of the Persian army collapse because of a single, perfectly timed lie. And finally, you'll learn what Alexander did after the battle. That made even his own generals turn away in silence. And all of it happened in one day. Now let's rewind. Because to understand how an empire died, you need to feel the dread that filled this field. Before a single blow was struck. You are a Macedonian infantryman. A peasant's son. You have marched thousands of miles from home. Your sandals are worn through. Your spear shaft is chipped and splintered. You've crossed rivers where men froze to death standing up. You've watched friends die of disease, thirst, and exhaustion. And now you stand here, staring at the largest army ever assembled against you. You know their numbers. Everyone does. 250,000. Infantry from every corner of the Persian Empire. Cavalry so dense their hooves turn the earth into powder. Chariots fitted with scythe blades, sharpened to carve through ranks of men. Archers from Media, slingers from Babylon, nobles armored in gold. And you are 47,000 tired men. With iron discipline and nowhere to run. Behind you is the long road home. Ahead of you is annihilation. You don't need a commander to tell you this is bad. You can feel it in your stomach. That hollow, sinking weight that tells you something is wrong on a level words can't reach. Some men whisper prayers. Others vomit. A few just stare. And then, you hear it. Hooves. One rider approaches from behind your lines. Alexander. He doesn't shout. He doesn't make speeches. He rides slowly along the front, helmet gleaming, eyes scanning faces. And when he looks at you, it feels like he's already measuring how you'll die. Because Alexander of Macedon does not promise survival. He promises victory. And those are not the same thing. To the Persians across the field, Alexander looks like a reckless boy. 26 years old. Outnumbered. Far from home. To his own men, he looks like something more dangerous. A man who does not know how to stop. But before this field became a graveyard, before empires collapsed, Alexander had already been forged by loss. And this is where the story turns dark. Because Alexander is not marching toward this battle to win territory. He is marching to silence a voice that has haunted him since childhood. You see, Alexander grew up in the shadow of a giant. His father, Philip II of Macedon, was not just a king. He was a machine. Philip forged Macedon from fractured tribes into a war engine. He drilled discipline into peasants until they could fight blind. He created the phalanx. Long spears. Locked shields. An unstoppable wall of death. And Alexander watched it all. But Philip was not a kind man. He drank. He raged. He humiliated his son in front of the court. Alexander learned early that love was conditional. Victory earned praise. Weakness earned contempt. And then one night, at a wedding feast, Philip was murdered. Stabbed in public. Bleeding out on the floor while nobles screamed. Alexander was 20. One moment, he was a prince. The next, he was king. Surrounded by men who wanted him dead. He crushed them without mercy. Friends. Rivals. Cousins. Because Alexander learned a brutal truth early. Hesitation kills kings. By the time he crossed into Asia, he wasn't just fighting Persia. He was trying to outrun doubt. Every victory had to be absolute. Every battle had to prove he was greater than his father. Greater than history itself. And now here he stands. Facing the Persian great king, Darius III. Darius is everything Alexander is not. Older. Richer. Wrapped in luxury and tradition. Darius commands the largest empire on earth. From Egypt to India. An empire so vast it takes months for messages to cross it. To Darius, Alexander is an annoyance. A rebellious Western king who refuses to know his place. So Darius does what emperors do. He brings everything. He chooses the battlefield carefully. A wide, flat plain near Gaugamela. Perfect for cavalry. Perfect for chariots. Persian engineers spend days leveling the ground. Removing rocks. Filling holes. This land is sculpted for slaughter. When Alexander scouts the field, his officers go pale. This terrain is a nightmare. No hills to anchor flanks. No narrow passes. Nowhere to hide. One general quietly suggests retreat. Another suggests waiting for night. Alexander listens. And then he does something that terrifies everyone. He orders the army to rest. Not withdraw. Not reposition. Sleep. His men stare at him. Sleep. In front of that? But Alexander knows something they don't. Darius expects fear. He expects hesitation. He expects Alexander to be crushed by the sight of Persian numbers. Instead, Alexander sleeps. That night, Persian scouts report something unbelievable. The Macedonian camp is quiet. No last-minute preparations. No frantic movements. Just men lying down. Darius cannot sleep. He paces his tent. He calls for advisors. He orders torches lit across the field, bathing the night in fire. He believes Alexander must be planning something. A night attack. A trick. But Alexander is already inside his head. Morning comes. The sun rises over Gaugamela. And now we meet the people who will die here. First, there is Amyntas. A Macedonian cavalryman. Barely 20. He rides with the companion cavalry, Alexander's elite. Amyntas has never been in a battle this large. He grips his reins so hard his knuckles turn white. His horse smells his fear and tosses its head. Amyntas tells himself one thing. If the king charges, I charge. Then there is Artabasos, a Persian noble. He commands a cavalry unit from Bactria. His armor is gilded. His helmet crested with horsehair dyed crimson. Artabasos believes the gods favor Persia. How could they not? Look at the numbers. Look at the wealth. Look at the empire. He plans to take a Macedonian head before noon. And finally, there is Darius himself. The great king watches from a high chariot. Purple robes. Golden scepter. Immortals guarding his sides. He believes this day will be remembered as the moment Alexander was erased. He has no idea. Because Alexander is about to do something so insane that his own commanders think he's lost his mind. As the armies form up, Alexander does not line up straight. He angles his entire force. Not toward Darius, but away. The Macedonian line drifts right. Step by deliberate step. Persian commanders are confused. Is he retreating? Is he afraid? Darius hesitates. And that hesitation will cost him everything. Because Alexander is not moving away. He is pulling the Persian army out of position. Stretching it. Forcing cavalry to follow. Creating a gap. A single, fatal gap. And when that gap opens, Alexander lowers his spear. He looks at his companions. And without a speech, without a warning, he charges. Straight at the heart of the Persian Empire. This is where the world holds its breath. And this is where the killing begins. But what happens next is not the victory you think. Because, within minutes, everything starts to go wrong. And when it does, the ground itself seems to scream. Stay with me. The moment Alexander spurs his horse forward, time fractures. There is no trumpet call loud enough to capture it. No signal grand enough to explain what every man feels in that instant. You feel it in your gut before you understand it with your eyes. The king is charging. Not toward safety. Not toward the edge. Straight into the densest, deadliest point of the Persian line. And you, whether you want to or not, are going with him. The companion cavalry surges forward like a single beast. Horses slam shoulder to shoulder. Leather creaks. Metal rattles. Men scream, not battle cries yet, but raw, involuntary sounds ripped out by fear. Amyntas barely has time to think. 1 second he's gripping his reins. The next, the ground is shaking beneath him. Dust explodes upward, clogging his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He tastes grit and sweat and iron. Ahead, Persian cavalry rush to meet them. Bright armor. Long lances. Faces painted with confidence that hasn't yet been broken. And then the collision hits. It's not two armies meeting. It's two worlds smashing together. The first impact knocks the breath from Amyntas's chest. His spear punches into something solid. Bone, maybe a breastplate, he doesn't know. The shock travels up his arm and rattles his teeth. Men slam into men. Horses scream as steel bites into flesh. A Persian rider is thrown backward, trampled before he hits the ground. Amyntas sees a face for half a second, eyes wide, mouth open, then it's gone, crushed under hooves. This is not heroic combat. This is chaos compressed into seconds. Alexander is already deep inside the enemy formation. He fights like a man possessed. His spear shatters on impact with a Persian noble's chest. He drops it instantly, draws his sword, and keeps moving. Left. Right. Downward slash. Blood sprays across his armor, warm and slick. Persian cavalry recoil, not because they're weaker, but because they didn't expect this. No one expects a king to lead like this. But here's the part that history often softens. This charge does not break the Persians. Not yet. Because while Alexander punches forward, something terrible is happening elsewhere. On the Macedonian left flank, Parmenion is in trouble. Parmenion is old, experienced, cautious. He commands the Thessalian cavalry, facing wave after wave of Persian horsemen. And they are being overwhelmed. The Persian left wing surges forward in massive numbers. They don't need finesse. They have weight. The Thessalians are pushed back. Slowly, relentlessly. Men begin to fall. Horses go down screaming, legs shattered. Persian arrows darken the sky. Parmenion sends a messenger. He shouts over the din, grabs a young rider by the arm, and points. Ride to the king. Now. The rider turns his horse and disappears into the dust. If Alexander doesn't break through soon, The Macedonian army will be split, encircled, crushed. And Alexander has no idea yet. Back at the center, the Persian scythed chariots begin their run. This is the moment every Macedonian infantryman has been dreading. The chariots roll forward, wheels spinning faster and faster. Blades mounted on the axles glint in the sun. Their purpose is simple. Carve lanes through infantry. Rip men apart. Break formations. You hear them before you see them. A deep, rising roar. Wood creaking. Metal whining. Men tighten their grips on their spears. Some pray. Others freeze. The first chariot hits the Macedonian line. And something unexpected happens. The phalanx opens. Not breaks. Opens. Like a mouth. The chariot plunges into the gap, and suddenly there are men everywhere. Javelins slam into horses' chests. Spears thrust upward into drivers. A blade slices through a shield and takes a man's arm with it. But the formation closes again. The chariot is swallowed. One Macedonian slips on blood and falls. The scythe blade takes his leg clean off. He doesn't scream at first. He just stares. Then the pain hits, and the sound cuts through everything. More chariots come. Some are stopped. Some get through. Everywhere there is screaming, choking, begging. And still, the Persian center holds. Alexander is fighting like a man racing death itself. He sees an opening, a widening gap near Darius's position. This is it. This is the moment he has trained for his entire life. He gathers his companions and drives forward again. Straight at Darius. The Persian king sees it. For the first time that day, Darius feels something cold grip his chest. This isn't supposed to be happening. Alexander is not slowing. The gap widens as Persian units pull back to protect the king. And suddenly, horror of horrors, Darius's chariot is in danger. A companion spear takes down a royal guard. Another Macedonian rider slashes at the chariot's horses. Darius's charioteer is struck down. The great king looks around and sees chaos where order should be. This is the first false ending. Because here, right here, history almost changes completely. If Alexander pushes 10 more seconds, if one more spear lands true, the Persian Empire ends with a dead king. But it doesn't happen. Because fear wins. Darius does what no Persian king is supposed to do. He turns. And he flees. The moment Darius's chariot wheels around, something snaps across the battlefield. Persian soldiers see it. The great king is leaving. Not retreating. Running. What begins as confusion becomes panic in seconds. Units hesitate. Orders go unheard. Men glance over shoulders. Alexander sees it. He knows this is the killing blow. He screams for pursuit. The companions surge after the fleeing Persians, cutting them down from behind. This should be the end. This should be the collapse of the Persian army. And for a moment, it looks like it is. But then reality hits. A second messenger reaches Alexander. Parmenion is being crushed. The Macedonian left flank is on the verge of collapse. If Alexander continues the pursuit, his army could be destroyed even as Darius escapes. This is the second impossible choice. Kill the empire. Or save the army. Alexander hesitates. Just for a heartbeat. And that heartbeat saves Persia, temporarily. He breaks off the pursuit. Turns his cavalry around. Rides back toward the sounds of desperate fighting. This decision will haunt historians forever. Because while Alexander races back, Darius escapes into the east. The Persian Empire is wounded, but not yet dead. Back on the left flank, the situation is dire. Parmenion's men are exhausted. Their horses lathered. Their lines thinning. Persian cavalry press in from all sides. Amyntas, who followed Alexander back, rides straight into the chaos. He sees a Thessalian dragged from his saddle and speared on the ground. He slashes wildly, not even sure if he's hitting friend or foe. Alexander arrives like a storm. The companions smash into the Persian flank. The effect is immediate. Persian cavalry recoil. Momentum shifts. What was a rout becomes a struggle. And then, it breaks. Persian units begin to flee everywhere. Not in formation. Not with orders. They run. Men throw down weapons to run faster. Horses trample fallen comrades. The field becomes a killing ground. This is where the slaughter truly begins. Macedonian infantry advance, stabbing into backs. Cavalry ride down fleeing soldiers, cutting until arms ache. The dust turns red. Bodies pile so thick men trip over them. One Persian soldier falls into a shallow ditch filled with blood and cannot climb out. He drowns standing up. Another clings to a Macedonian's leg, begging in a language no one understands. He is kicked away and finished with a spear. Amyntas rides until his arm goes numb. He doesn't remember faces anymore. Only movement. Only resistance. By afternoon, the field of Gaugamela is unrecognizable. What was once open plain is churned into mud and gore. Estimates vary, but tens of thousands are dead. Persian losses are catastrophic. Alexander's army has suffered too, but nothing like this. The empire has not just lost a battle. It has lost belief. And yet, this is not the end. Because even as the Persians flee, Alexander does something that confuses everyone. He stops. He does not pursue indefinitely. He calls his men back. Why? Because the truth is darker than victory. Alexander's army is spent. Horses are collapsing. Men are wounded, dehydrated, shaking. If they chase too far, they could lose everything to exhaustion and counterattack. So Alexander lets the survivors go. And in doing so, he seals the psychological death of the Persian Empire. Because now everyone knows. Darius ran. The great king bled authority on that field. News spreads faster than armies. Cities begin to open their gates. Satraps switch sides. The empire begins to rot from the inside. That night, Alexander walks the battlefield. Torches flicker over heaps of dead. The smell is unbearable. Blood. Waste. Burned flesh. Men moan in the dark. Some are alive. Some are not. Alexander stops beside a fallen Persian noble, Artabasos. The man who rode dressed like a god. His armor is split open. His chest caved in. His eyes stare at nothing. Alexander looks down at him for a long moment. Then he steps away. He does not celebrate. Because he knows something his men do not yet understand. This war is not over. Darius is still alive. And as long as he lives, Alexander cannot stop. Not now. Not ever. But what happens next, after the battle, is where the story turns even darker. Because victory at Gaugamela gives Alexander something far more dangerous than power. It gives him certainty. And certainty is how conquerors become monsters. Stay with me. Because the next part of this story is where Alexander stops being a king and starts becoming a legend people fear. The night after Gaugamela does not feel like victory. It feels like a grave that never ends. You walk the field with the others, stepping carefully because the ground is slick. Every footfall threatens to slide out from under you. The dust has turned to paste. Blood and earth mixed into something alive, something that clings. Torches flicker and throw shadows that don't make sense. Arms reach out of the darkness at impossible angles. A man groans somewhere to your left, then goes silent. No one speaks. Not because orders demand silence, but because no one knows what to say after a day like this. You've survived. But you don't feel lucky. You feel hollow. Alexander walks among the dead. Not surrounded by cheering men. Not lifted onto shields. He walks alone. His armor is dented, scratched, smeared with blood that isn't all his. His face is calm, almost distant. Inside him, something has shifted. 4 years, doubt has followed him like a shadow. Is he worthy of his father's legacy? Is he truly greater, or just reckless? Gaugamela answers that question. Not with words. with bodies. This was not a victory of chance. This was a victory of will. And now Alexander knows it. The empire didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because one man refused to believe it was unbeatable. That realization is intoxicating. And dangerous. Because from this moment on, Alexander stops asking if something can be done. He only asks how much blood it will cost. The morning after the battle, messengers ride in from every direction. They bring news that feels unreal. Babylon has opened its gates. Susa is preparing tribute. Persian governors are abandoning Darius. An empire is dissolving without another fight. You expect Alexander to hesitate, to consolidate, to rest. He doesn't. He moves. Because in Alexander's mind, momentum is everything. Stop, and doubt creeps back in. Stop, and the myth cracks. So the army marches again. And this is where the story most people never hear truly begins. Because ending an empire is not the same as ruling one. Babylon welcomes Alexander like a god. The gates swing open. Flowers are thrown. Priests kneel. The city is immense. Walls so thick chariots can ride atop them. Temples older than memory. Alexander enters in silence. He does not sack the city. He does not slaughter the people. Instead, he does something far more unsettling. He adopts Persian customs. He wears their robes, accepts their titles, honors their gods. To his new subjects, this looks like wisdom. To his Macedonian soldiers, it feels like betrayal. These men followed Alexander across deserts and rivers. They bled for him at Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela. They did not come here to bow. Around campfires, whispers begin. He's becoming one of them. He forgets who we are. He forgets who made him king. Alexander hears none of this. Or perhaps he hears it, and chooses not to care. Because in his mind, he is no longer just king of Macedon. He is king of Asia. And kings of Asia rule differently. But Darius is still alive. Somewhere east, the great king runs with the remnants of his court. He sends letters. He offers peace. Ransom. His daughter's hand in marriage. Half the empire. Alexander reads the letters aloud to his generals. Then he tears them apart. He does not want half an empire. He wants the end. So the march continues. And the farther east the army goes, the darker Alexander becomes. Let me tell you about Cletus. Cletus the Black. He saved Alexander's life once. At the Granicus River, Cletus cut down a Persian noble who was about to kill the king. Cletus is loyal, blunt, unimpressed by titles. And one night, after too much wine, Cletus says the wrong thing. He criticizes Alexander. Not in private. In front of others. He says Alexander owes his victories to his father's army. To Macedonian discipline. Not to divine destiny. The room goes quiet. Alexander's face changes. You can feel it, the air tightening, like before a storm. Cletus keeps talking. He should stop. Everyone knows it. But alcohol and truth are a deadly mix. Alexander explodes. He screams that Cletus insults him. That he denies his greatness. That he denies the gods. Cletus fires back. And then, Alexander grabs a spear. One motion. No hesitation. The spear goes through Cletus's chest. The man who once saved his life collapses on the floor. Dead. The room freezes. Alexander stares at what is done. For a moment, the conqueror cracks. He drops the spear. Falls to his knees. Tries to kill himself with his own weapon. His friends restrain him. He weeps. He wails. But the damage is done. The king who crossed Asia with his men has become something else. A man who kills those who remind him of who he used to be. And still, the army marches. Because now there is no turning back. Darius is betrayed by his own men. His generals, seeing no hope, seize him. They stab him. Leave him dying on the roadside. Alexander finds him too late. The great king of Persia lies in a cart, bleeding out, eyes glassy. Alexander covers Darius with his own cloak. He calls him brother. It is a gesture meant for history, but it rings hollow. Because Darius is dead. And with him, the Persian Empire truly ends. This should be the final ending. The empire is gone. The enemy is dead. This is the moment most stories stop. But Alexander doesn't. He keeps going. And this is where the real cost reveals itself. Beyond Persia lies Bactria, Sogdia, lands that do not submit easily. Here, people do not kneel to conquerors. They fight. They disappear. They ambush. Alexander is forced into a new kind of war. No grand battles. No decisive charges. Just endless skirmishes. Mountains. Deserts. Men die far from glory. And Alexander changes again. He grows harsher. More suspicious. He executes governors. Crucifies rebels. Burns villages. He marries a local woman, Roxana, partly for love, partly for control. His men grumble louder now. This is not what they signed up for. They wanted Persia. They got endless war. And then Alexander makes the decision that breaks them. He announces they will march into India. The men refuse. This is the breaking point. Years of fighting. Thousands of miles. Too many graves. They stand their ground. Alexander rages. Threatens. Pleads. Nothing works. Finally, he locks himself in his tent for days. When he emerges, his eyes are empty. He agrees to turn back. But something inside him has snapped. On the return march, men die in droves crossing deserts. No water. No mercy. By the time Alexander reaches Babylon again, he is exhausted. Wounded. Ill. And then, at 32 years old, he dies. Fever. Poison. No one knows for sure. His empire fractures almost immediately. Generals carve it up like scavengers. The dream collapses. And this is the final false ending. Because the empire Alexander destroyed never truly vanished. Rome would rise in its place. Empires would repeat the pattern. But Gaugamela remains unique. One day. One decision. One charge. An empire ended not by slow decay, but by a man who refused to believe limits applied to him. Here is the truth history hides. Alexander did not win because he was kinder. Or smarter. He won because he was willing to gamble everything, including his soul, on a single moment. 47,000 versus 250,000. It should have been impossible. And that is why it worked. Because no one prepared for a man who would look at impossible odds. And see opportunity. You now know the real story. Not the marble statue. Not the legend polished smooth. But the blood-soaked truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Stay with me. Because in the final parts, we'll confront the question that history still refuses to answer. Was Alexander a hero? Or was he just the first man to prove that belief can kill empires faster than armies ever could? Before you think this story is finished, let me stop you. Because this is the point where most people misunderstand Alexander completely. They think Gaugamela was the peak. They think everything after was victory laps and golden thrones. That is wrong. Gaugamela didn't end the war. It unleashed something far worse. Because after you break an empire in a single day, you are left with a terrifying question. What do you do when nothing on earth can stop you? Alexander didn't know how to answer that. And the men around him paid the price. After Darius's death, Alexander officially becomes king of Asia. Not a conqueror. Not a liberator. A ruler. And ruling, he quickly discovers, is harder than killing. The Persian Empire wasn't just an army. It was systems. Laws. Cultures stacked on top of each other like layers of bone. Alexander tries to hold it together by becoming Persian himself. Proskinesis. Court rituals. Divine kingship. He expects his Macedonian officers to bow to him like Persians bow to their king. They refuse. These men grew up eating at the same fires, fighting shoulder to shoulder. They followed a king, not a god. And now that king demands worship. This is where paranoia creeps in. Alexander begins to see disloyalty everywhere. A glance held too long. A joke whispered too quietly. He executes Philotas, son of Parmenion, accusing him of treason. Then, because dead men can't defend themselves, he orders Parmenion killed too. The same Parmenion who held the line at Gaugamela. The same man who saved the army while Alexander chased Darius. One letter. One order. Executed without trial. This is how empires rot. Not from enemies, but from fear at the top. Now let me tell you another human story. There was a Macedonian infantryman named Peucestes. Not famous. Not noble. At Gaugamela, he fought in the phalanx, shield locked, spear forward. He survived. Years later, during a siege in India, Alexander is badly wounded by an arrow. Chaos erupts. Persians gone. Now it's tribesmen. Walls. Poisoned arrows. Alexander collapses, blood pouring from his chest. The army panics. If Alexander dies here, deep in India, surrounded by enemies, the empire explodes instantly. Peucestes does something no one else dares. He throws himself over Alexander's body, using his shield to protect the king. Arrows slam into the shield. Some pierce through. Peucestes is wounded again and again. But he doesn't move. Alexander survives. Peucestes is later rewarded with power. But here's the bitter truth. Alexander doesn't thank him like a brother. He rewards him like a king. Distance has replaced loyalty. By now, Alexander's army is a shadow of what crossed into Asia. Men are scarred, exhausted, haunted. They have fought for nearly a decade without rest. And then comes India. India is not Persia. There are no grand capitals begging for mercy. No satraps switching sides. There are elephants. War elephants. Living siege towers that scream, trample, and crush men beneath their feet. At the Hydaspes River, Alexander faces King Porus. Another outnumbered battle. Another impossible gamble. The river is flooded. The banks slick with mud. Alexander crosses at night, in a storm. Men drown. Horses panic. When the battle begins, Macedonians face elephants head-on for the first time. They smell them before they see them. A rank, animal stench mixed with blood and panic. Elephants charge. Men are lifted on tusks, thrown screaming into the air. Bones snap like twigs under massive feet. One soldier is crushed so completely his body is unrecognizable. This is the lowest point. This is where men break. And yet, Alexander wins again. Porus is defeated. And Alexander, strangely, spares him. Keeps him as a ruler. It looks merciful. But it's also calculation. Alexander no longer fights to destroy. He fights to control. And that control is slipping. Because after India, the army refuses to go further. They have reached the edge of the world, as far as they know. Rain falls endlessly. Diseases spread. Men cry openly. This is the mutiny. Not loud. Not violent. Quiet. The men simply stop marching. Alexander screams at them. Calls them cowards. Reminds them of Gaugamela. Of glory. Nothing works. Finally, he realizes something horrifying. The men who once followed him into hell no longer fear him. They fear what comes after him. He agrees to turn back. But the retreat is worse than any battle. Crossing the Jedrosian desert, thousands die. No water. Blistering heat. Men drink sand-stained water and vomit until they collapse. Horses fall and are butchered for meat. A mother carrying her child collapses. Alexander pours water into her helmet and hands it to her. She thanks him. He pours the water onto the ground instead, to show he shares their suffering. It is a gesture. But it changes nothing. When they finally reach Babylon, Alexander is not the man who left Macedon. He is thinner, scarred, exhausted. He drinks heavily. He plans endlessly. Arabia, the Western Mediterranean. There is no end in his mind. And then, suddenly, the machine stops. Alexander falls ill. High fever. Weakness. Day after day, he grows worse. His generals gather around his bed. They ask him the most dangerous question in history. To whom do you leave the empire? Alexander can barely speak. Some say he whispers. To the strongest. Others say he says nothing. Either way, it is a death sentence. Because an empire built on one man cannot survive without him. Alexander dies at 32. No successor. No plan. Within days, the empire fractures. Generals turn on each other. Wars erupt. The bloodshed Alexander unleashed does not end with him. It multiplies. Here is the final, uncomfortable truth. Gaugamela didn't just end an empire. It taught the world a lesson it could never forget. That belief, absolute, unyielding belief, can overpower numbers, tradition, and history itself. And that once someone proves this, the world is never the same. One part remains. Because we still haven't answered the most important question. Not how Alexander won, but what it cost humanity when he did. Stay with me. Imagine standing in Babylon after Alexander's death. The streets are quiet in a way that feels wrong. Not peaceful. Empty. The man who bent the world around his will is gone, and suddenly everyone realizes something terrifying. No one knows what comes next. The generals circle like wolves. Men who once shared tents now sharpen knives for each other. The empire Alexander carved out in blood has no spine without him. And this is where the final truth of Gaugamela reveals itself. Because Alexander didn't just end the Persian Empire in one day. He ended the idea that empires are permanent. Before Gaugamela, power felt immovable, ancient, inevitable. After Gaugamela, everyone understood something new. If one man could destroy an empire in a single day, then any empire could fall. And that realization is more dangerous than any army. Let's go back to that battlefield one last time. The dust has settled now. The bodies are cold. 47,000 men stood against 250,000. Not because the odds made sense, but because retreat was worse. Alexander knew something most rulers never learn. Men don't fight hardest when they believe they will win. They fight hardest when they believe they must. At Gaugamela, Alexander engineered desperation. He denied his army escape, denied them comfort, denied them illusion. And in doing so, he forced them into a single direction, forward. This wasn't brilliance alone. It was psychological warfare. Alexander didn't defeat the Persians by killing them first. He defeated them by making Darius doubt himself. Every step to the right stretched the Persian line. Every moment of hesitation poisoned command. Every second Alexander lived in that charge told the Persians the unthinkable. This man does not fear you. And fear is contagious. Once Darius turned, the battle was already over. Not because men stopped fighting, but because belief collapsed. Now here is the part history books whisper, if they mention it at all. Alexander paid for Gaugamela for the rest of his life. Every victory after had to be bigger. Every risk greater. Every conquest more extreme. Because once you prove you can do the impossible, ordinary success feels like failure. Alexander could never stop. He chased the feeling of Gaugamela across Asia. Through deserts. Over mountains. Into jungles. And it nearly destroyed him. He lost friends. Lost trust. Lost himself. By the end, the men who once followed him out of devotion followed him out of fear and habit. And when he died, the empire died with him. That's the final irony. The man who ended an empire in one day couldn't build one that lasted a generation. So what does that mean for you? Why does this story still matter? Because Gaugamela is not just about spears and horses and ancient kings. It's about how systems fall. They don't fall when they are weak. They fall when someone exposes the lie holding them together. Persia fell because it believed itself eternal. Alexander won because he believed nothing was. And once that belief entered the world, it never left. Rome learned it. Napoleon learned it. Modern generals still study it. Not the formations. Not the numbers. The psychology. The moment when an army realizes the man in front of them is willing to go further than anyone else. Further into risk. Further into chaos. Further into blood. That is how empires die. Not slowly. Not peacefully. But suddenly. Violently. In a single, irreversible moment. You now know the real story. Not the clean marble statues. Not the heroic paintings. But the truth soaked into the ground at Gaugamela. A truth most people will never hear. That the world doesn't change because of fate. It changes because one person decides the cost doesn't matter anymore. And when that happens, history breaks.